The silver ship appeared above Earth without warning. It was massive, larger than anything humanity had ever built. The vessel hung in space like a jewel, its surface reflecting the light of the sun. Inside the orbital station Freedom's Reach, alarms began to sound. Commander Jake Morrison rushed to the command deck, his heart pounding. This was it, first contact with alien life. Jake was a military man, tall and broad-shouldered with gray hair at his temples. He had served in the Earth Defense Fleet for 20 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Lieutenant Sophie Blake stood beside him, her fingers flying across the console as she tried to establish communication with the alien vessel. The transmission came through in perfect English. Jake found that strange, but he listened carefully. A face appeared on the screen, not human but close enough to be unsettling. The alien had smooth purple skin, large golden eyes, and a crest of bone along its skull. It wore elaborate robes that suggested importance. The alien introduced itself as Ambassador Velnara of the Kithran Empire, chief diplomat of the Galactic Council. Jake noticed the pride in her voice, the way she spoke as if addressing children. Velnara explained that the Galactic Council had governed this region of space for 3,000 years. 47 advanced species worked together under their guidance to maintain peace and prosperity. Jake felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps humanity could join this great alliance, share knowledge and technology with older civilizations. Perhaps the stars would be friendlier than Earth's bloody history had been. Then Velnara began listing the demands. Her voice remained pleasant, almost cheerful, as if she were offering gifts rather than ultimatums. First, humanity must surrender all military vessels to Council authority. Second, Earth's population must be registered in the Council's genetic database. Third, humanity could only colonize worlds approved by the Council. Fourth, Earth must pay tribute in raw materials, specifically rare metals and water. Fifth, all human technology must be submitted for Council approval before use. The list continued. 17 demands in total, each one stripping away a piece of human sovereignty. Jake felt his jaw tighten as Velnara spoke. Beside him, Sophie had gone pale. When the ambassador finished, she smiled warmly at the camera, as if expecting gratitude. Jake asked how long humanity had to consider these terms. Velnara looked confused by the question, her head tilting slightly. She explained that there was nothing to consider. These were the standard conditions that all new species accepted. Every civilization in the galaxy had agreed to these same terms. Humanity would do the same. Something cold settled in Jake's chest. He looked at Sophie, saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes. They had waited so long to find other intelligent life in the universe. They had dreamed of partnership, of friendship among the stars. Instead, they had found masters who expected obedience. Jake turned back to the screen. He spoke clearly, his voice steady despite the anger rising inside him. He told Velnara that humanity had not fought its way to the stars just to become servants. Humans had struggled for thousands of years to build a civilization based on freedom and dignity. They would not surrender those values to strangers who offered nothing but demands. Then Jake said the single word that would change galactic history. He said no, just that, nothing more. He cut the transmission before Velnara could respond. Sophie stared at him in shock. She asked if he realized what he had just done. Jake nodded slowly. He knew exactly what he had done. He had probably started a war. But some things were worth fighting for, and freedom was at the top of that list. The alien ship remained in orbit for 3 more hours. Jake sent an emergency message to Earth's government explaining the situation. President Karen Hughes responded within 30 minutes. Her message was brief and clear. Humanity would not accept slavery, regardless of the consequences. The Earth Defense Fleet was to prepare for possible military action. Jake watched the alien vessel through the observation window. It was beautiful, elegant in a way that human ships could never match. The Council clearly had technology far beyond anything Earth possessed. If this became a war, humanity would be facing enemies who had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. Sophie joined him at the window. She was young, only 30, with dark hair tied back in a regulation bun. She asked what Jake thought would happen next. He admitted he did not know. Maybe the Council would leave them alone. Maybe they would send more diplomats willing to negotiate fairly. Maybe they would send warships. Jake hoped for the first option, expected the second, and prepared for the third. He ordered the station to battle readiness. Every defense platform in Earth orbit received the same command. Humanity's small fleet of deep space vessels was recalled to the solar system. Colony stations on Mars and the moons of Jupiter were warned to prepare for possible attack. The alien ship finally departed, accelerating away from Earth at impossible speeds. Jake felt no relief at its departure. He knew this was not over. The Galactic Council had ruled for 3,000 years by making demands and expecting obedience. They would not accept humanity's refusal without a response. That night, Jake sent a message to his brother Dan, a civilian engineer living in Chicago. He did not tell Dan about the military preparations or his fears about the future. Instead, he wrote about how proud he was of humanity in this moment. Humans had been given a choice between freedom and safety, and they had chosen freedom. Whatever happened next, at least they would face it standing tall. Sophie found him in his quarters, staring at the stars through the small window. She said the crew was scared but determined. Everyone understood what was at stake. Jake thanked her for the report. He asked if she thought he had made the right choice. Sophie did not hesitate. She said he had made the only choice that mattered. The galaxy was vast, filled with wonders humanity had barely begun to explore. Out there were civilizations older than human history, technologies that seemed like magic, and mysteries beyond imagination. Humanity wanted to be part of that greater universe, to learn and grow alongside other intelligent species, but not at the cost of everything that made them human. Not by surrendering their freedom before they had even begun their journey to the stars. If the price of joining the galactic community was slavery, then humanity would remain alone. And if the Council tried to force submission, they would discover that humans knew how to fight. Jake Morrison stood at his window and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, decisions were being made about humanity's fate. He could not control what the Council would do. He could only control how humanity responded, and that response would be the same as it had always been throughout human history. They would endure. They would resist. They would never surrender. Ambassador Velnara stood before the Galactic Council, her composure shaken for the first time in her long diplomatic career. The Great Chamber on Axiom Prime was filled with representatives from 47 species, each more confused than the last. The humans had said no, simply refused. In 3,000 years of Council history, no species had ever rejected their initial demands. War Chief Throck of the Mandible clans rose from his seat. He was enormous, covered in thick chitinous armor that made him look like a walking fortress. His multiple eyes glowed with contempt as he addressed the assembly. Throck believed the solution was simple. The humans were primitives who did not understand their situation. A demonstration of council power would correct this misunderstanding quickly. The council debated for hours. Some members suggested waiting, giving the humans time to reconsider. Others agreed with Throck that immediate action was necessary. The elders, ancient beings who had guided the council since its founding, finally made their decision. They would send 3 warships to a human colony. The humans would be given one chance to accept the terms. If they refused again, the colony would be destroyed. The message was clear. Obey or face extinction. It had worked on every other species the council had encountered. The humans would be no different. Captain Lisa Grant commanded the defense platform Ironside at Proxima Station. She was a career military officer, 45 years old with red hair starting to show gray. The station was a mining colony, home to 12,000 people including her husband and 2 children. They lived on the civilian section, away from the military installations where Lisa spent most of her time. The 3 council warships appeared at the edge of the system without warning. Lisa's sensors detected them immediately. They were huge, each one larger than Ironside and bristling with weapons. She sent an emergency alert to Earth and ordered the station to battle stations. The transmission from the council ships came quickly. War Chief Throck's face filled her screen, all of his eyes focused on her with predatory intensity. He spoke in harsh tones, informing her that Proxima Station was now under council authority. All humans on the station were to prepare for transport to processing facilities. The station itself would be dismantled and its resources would be claimed as tribute to the council. Throck gave Lisa 1 hour to comply. If she refused, every human on the station would be killed. The 3 warships moved into attack formation, weapons charging. Lisa could see the energy readings on her sensors. They had enough firepower to vaporize the entire station in seconds. Lisa called an emergency meeting with her senior staff. Her executive officer, Commander Pete Harris, suggested immediate evacuation. They could get the civilians to escape pods and flee deeper into the system. At least some people would survive. Lieutenant Amy Chen disagreed. She pointed out that the Council ships would simply hunt down the escape pods. There was nowhere to run. Lisa made her decision. She ordered the evacuation of all civilians to the underground shelters. The station had been built into a large asteroid, with reinforced chambers deep inside for emergencies. It would not save them if the station was destroyed, but it gave them a chance. Then she activated every defense satellite in the system, armed all of Ironside's weapons, and sent a priority transmission to Earth. Her message was simple. Proxima Station would not surrender. If the Council wanted the station, they would have to take it by force. She ended the transmission and began preparing for battle. Pete found her in the command center, checking weapon systems. He asked if she was sure about this choice. Lisa looked at him steadily. She said she had 2 children sleeping in the shelters below. She had a husband down there too. If she surrendered, they would all become slaves. If she fought, they might die, but at least they would die free. The hour passed. Thruk sent one final transmission, his voice filled with disbelief. He asked if Lisa truly intended to resist. Did she not understand that her primitive weapons were useless against Council technology? Her station would be destroyed in minutes. Everyone would die for nothing. Lisa responded calmly. She told Thruk that humans had a saying. It was better to die on your feet than live on your knees. Then she gave the order to fire. The battle was brief and brutal. The Council ships had better shields, more powerful weapons, and faster engines. But Lisa had something they did not expect. She had desperation and creativity born from humanity's endless history of warfare. Ironside's railguns could not penetrate the Council shields, so Lisa targeted their sensors instead. She blinded them with electromagnetic pulses and debris clouds. When that failed to slow them down, she launched every missile in her arsenal at once, overwhelming their point defense systems. The missiles did little damage, but they bought time. The defense satellites attacked in coordinated waves. They were small, easy to destroy, but there were dozens of them. The Council ships focused their fire on the satellites, giving Lisa precious seconds. She used that time to target the lead ship's engines with a concentrated beam from Ironside's main cannon. The shot was perfect. It punched through the Council ship's weakened rear shields and struck the engine core. The explosion was massive, lighting up the dark space like a newborn star. The lead ship tumbled out of formation, leaking atmosphere and burning. Thruk roared in fury. He had lost a warship to primitives. His remaining 2 vessels concentrated their fire on Ironside. The station's shields collapsed under the assault. Armor plating melted. Entire sections were torn open to space. Lisa's crew fought on, firing every weapon that still functioned. Pete reported that they had lost main power. Life support was failing. Weapons were down to 30%. They had minutes, maybe less. Lisa looked at the tactical display. 1 Council ship was destroyed. 2 remained. Not enough. She needed to do more damage. Lisa made her final decision. She ordered all remaining crew to evacuate to the shelters. Then she took manual control of Ironside's engines. Pete realized what she was planning and refused to leave. Together they pointed the dying station directly at the nearest Council warship and engaged maximum thrust. Thruk saw the crippled station accelerating toward his vessel and tried to evade. He was too slow. Ironside, all 3 million tons of metal and rock, crashed into the Council warship at full speed. Both vessels exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The last Council warship fled the system, carrying a stunned and terrified Thruk with it. He had come to punish primitives and demonstrate Council power. Instead, he had lost 2/3 of his force to an enemy that should have been helpless. 3 days later, Jake Morrison stood in the command center of Freedom's Reach, watching the recording of the battle. Earth's government had declared Captain Lisa Grant a hero. Her sacrifice had bought humanity something precious. It had shown the galaxy that humans would fight, that they would die rather than surrender. Sophie stood beside Jake, her face somber. She said that Lisa had a family, 2 children who would grow up without their mother, a husband who would never see his wife again. Jake nodded. He knew the cost. Every human who fought the council would pay a terrible price. But they would pay it willingly, because the alternative was worse than death. The alternative was slavery for their entire species, for every generation of humans yet to come. Lisa had understood that. She had chosen freedom for her children over safety for herself. Jake looked at the stars beyond the window. The council thought they had taught humanity a lesson at Proxima Station. They thought the destruction of the colony would terrify Earth into submission. They were wrong. Humanity had learned a different lesson. They had learned that the council could be hurt, that their ships could burn, that their soldiers could die. The Galactic Council was not invincible, and that meant humanity had a chance. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in their long history. Representatives from 47 species filled the Grand Chamber, and for the first time in centuries they were afraid. The humans had destroyed 2 council warships. Primitives who had barely achieved faster-than-light travel had killed trained warriors from civilizations thousands of years old. Belnara stood at the center of the chamber, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon her. She had been the first to make contact with humanity. Some council members now blamed her for this disaster. War Chief Throck sat in his designated area, his armor still scorched from the battle at Proxima Station. He refused to meet anyone's gaze, humiliated by his defeat. The elders entered the chamber, their ancient forms moving slowly. They were the oldest beings in the council, some having lived for over 2,000 years. Their wisdom had guided the galaxy through countless crises. But even they seemed uncertain now, troubled by this unprecedented situation. Counselor Zix of the Theoretical Worlds requested permission to speak. He was a small being, insect-like with delicate wings and compound eyes. His species specialized in analysis and research. Zix had spent the past 3 days studying everything the council had learned about humanity. What he discovered had kept him awake through several sleep cycles. Zix displayed images on the great screens around the chamber. Pictures of Earth's history appeared, violent and terrible. He showed wars that had consumed entire continents, weapons designed for mass destruction, cities reduced to ash. The council members watched in growing horror as Zix documented humanity's endless capacity for violence. He explained that humans had no natural weapons. They were not particularly strong or fast. They had no armor, no claws, no venom. Yet they had conquered their entire planet through pure aggression and adaptability. Humans had nearly driven themselves to extinction multiple times through warfare, only to rebuild and continue fighting. Zix showed more data. Every other species in the council had evolved with natural advantages that made cooperation easier. The Kithrans had telepathy that allowed them to share thoughts and emotions. The Mandible clans had hive instincts that created natural social hierarchies. The Theoretical Worlds had collective consciousness that made individuals less important than the group. Humans had none of these advantages. They were individuals, separate and often in conflict with each other. Yet somehow they had developed civilizations, technology, and eventually reached the stars. Zix said that humans were the most dangerous species he had ever studied. They fought not because they enjoyed it, but because they refused to accept defeat. One of the elders asked what this meant for the council. Zix responded quietly. It meant they had made a terrible mistake. The council's standard approach of overwhelming force and demands would not work on humans. Every act of violence would only make them more determined. Every demand would be met with refusal. Humans could not be intimidated because they valued freedom more than life itself. The chamber erupted in debate. Some representatives demanded that humanity be exterminated before they became a greater threat. Others suggested finding a diplomatic solution. War Chief Throck, recovering his voice, argued for assembling the Grand Armada and crushing Earth completely. While the council argued, Intelligence Director Hayes sat in his office in Washington, reviewing reports from human agents throughout known space. Hayes was a quiet man in his 50s with graying hair and tired eyes. He had spent 20 years in intelligence work, and he recognized a pattern when he saw one. Council scout ships had been spotted near every human colony. They were gathering information, mapping defenses, identifying weak points. Hayes knew what this meant. The Council was preparing for war, not a small punitive action like at Proxima Station, but a full military campaign designed to destroy humanity's capacity to resist. Hayes met with President Karen Hughes in the White House. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes from weeks of crisis management. The weight of leading humanity through its first interstellar war was crushing. She asked Hayes what their chances were if the Council attacked in force. Hayes was honest. He said their chances were poor. The Council had thousands of warships. Humanity had barely 200 vessels capable of deep space combat. Council technology was centuries ahead of human science. In a straight fight, humanity would lose badly. President Hughes asked if there was any hope at all. Hayes said yes, but not the kind of hope she wanted to hear. Humanity could not win a conventional war, but they could make victory so costly that the Council would eventually give up. Every battle would be fought to the last human ship. Every colony would resist to the last defender. Even if Earth fell, the surviving colonies would continue fighting. The president stared at Hayes for a long moment. She asked if he was suggesting a strategy of mutual destruction. Hayes nodded. It was the only strategy that made sense. The Council had to believe that destroying humanity would cost them everything. They had to fear the humans more than the humans feared them. President Hughes authorized the military buildup. Admiral Frank Cooper received orders to prepare Earth's fleets for total war. Frank was a veteran of the Mars Rebellion 20 years earlier, a tough old soldier who had seen combat before, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for fighting aliens with superior technology. Frank gathered his senior staff and laid out the situation honestly. They were going to fight a war they could not win through conventional means. Their job was not to defeat the Council in battle. Their job was to make the Council bleed for every victory, to make them pay such a high price that they would eventually seek peace. Commander Sophie Blake was promoted to captain and given command of the destroyer Defiant. She was young for such responsibility, but Jake Morrison had recommended her before his death. Sophie understood what was at stake better than most. She had watched Jake refuse the Council's demands. She had seen Lisa Grant sacrifice herself at Proxima Station. Sophie stood on the bridge of her new ship, looking at the crew around her. They were young, most of them in their 20s. They had joined the fleet dreaming of exploring the stars, not fighting wars. But they would do their duty because that was what humans did when faced with impossible odds. Back on Axiom Prime, the Council reached a decision. The Elders announced that the Grand Armada would be assembled. Every member species would contribute ships and warriors. They would gather the largest military force in galactic history and use it to crush humanity completely. It was the only way to restore order and demonstrate that the Council's authority was absolute. Belnara objected. She argued that destroying humanity would make martyrs of them. Other species might begin to question Council authority. The foundation of peace they had built for 3,000 years could collapse. The Elders dismissed her concerns. They said that harsh lessons were sometimes necessary. Humanity would serve as an example of what happened to those who defied the Council. War Chief Throck was given command of the Grand Armada. He accepted the honor with grim satisfaction. He had been humiliated at Proxima Station. Now he would have his revenge. The humans would learn that defiance had consequences. 3,000 warships began gathering at the Council's primary military base. Ships from dozens of species, each one powerful enough to destroy a city. Together they would be unstoppable. The Council believed that when humans saw such overwhelming force, they would finally surrender. Even the most stubborn species had to recognize when they were beaten. But the Council did not understand humans. They did not understand that throughout their history, humans had faced impossible odds and fought anyway. They did not understand that surrender was not in the human vocabulary when freedom was at stake. They did not understand that some things were worth dying for. Sophie received the intelligence reports about the Grand Armada. 3,000 ships heading toward Earth. She looked at the numbers and felt fear settle in her stomach. But she also felt something else, determination. Humanity had survived ice ages and plagues. They had endured world wars and near extinction. They would endure this too. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson that humans had known for thousands of years. Numbers did not guarantee victory. Technology did not ensure success. What mattered was will, courage, and the absolute refusal to give up. The Council had ships and weapons. Humanity had something stronger. They had the knowledge that they fought for everything that made life worth living. And that made all the difference. 6 months had passed since first contact, and the galaxy was transforming in ways the Council had never imagined. Trade routes near human space sat empty, abandoned by merchants who feared becoming caught in the coming war. 12 species had formally requested to leave the Council, terrified that humans might target them. Panic spread through civilizations that had known only peace for generations. The Council's carefully maintained order was crumbling. Species that had accepted their demands without question now whispered about resistance. Some wondered if they too could refuse the Council's authority. The humans had done the impossible. They had said no and survived. That simple act threatened everything the Council had built. War Chief Throck stood aboard his flagship, watching the Grand Armada assemble around him. 3,000 warships, the largest military force ever gathered in galactic history. Ships from 47 different species, each contributing their finest vessels and most experienced warriors. The sight should have filled him with pride. Instead, he felt uneasy. Throck had fought in the last Great War 1,500 years ago. He remembered the cost of large-scale conflict, the horror of watching worlds burn. The Council had created their system of demands and submission, specifically to avoid such wars. But now they were forced to wage war anyway, against an enemy that should have been too weak to matter. Captain Danny Wright commanded the Defense Station Sentinel's wall at the edge of the solar system. He was 32 years old, married to Helen for 8 years, with a 7-year-old daughter named Grace. Danny had joined the fleet to see the stars, to be part of humanity's great adventure into the cosmos. Instead, he found himself preparing to die in humanity's first interstellar war. The intelligence reports were clear. 3,000 Council warships were heading toward Earth. Danny commanded a defense network of 20 stations and 500 ships. The mathematics were brutally simple. Even if every human vessel destroyed multiple enemy ships, they would still be overwhelmed. This was not a battle they could win. Danny sent a final message to his wife and daughter. He told them he loved them. He told Grace to be brave, to study hard, to make the world better. He told Helen that being her husband had been the greatest joy of his life. He did not tell them he was about to die. They already knew. The Council Armada emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Danny's sensors lit up with thousands of contacts, so many ships that they blotted out the stars. War Chief Throck's face appeared on the communication screen. He looked tired, almost reluctant. Throck spoke formally. He said this was humanity's final chance. Surrender now and most humans would be allowed to live. Resist and the Council would destroy every human installation in the galaxy. Earth itself would be occupied and its people subjugated. The choice was simple: obey or die. Danny looked at his bridge crew. They were young, most of them barely out of training. They deserved long lives, families, futures. Instead, they would die here today, fighting an enemy they could not defeat. He asked if anyone wanted to request transfer to the evacuation ships heading toward the outer colonies. No one moved. They would stand with their captain. Danny responded to Throck. He said that humans had a long history of fighting impossible battles. They had stood at Thermopylae, at the Alamo, at countless other places where small numbers faced overwhelming odds. Humans lost most of those battles, but they fought anyway, because some things mattered more than survival. Freedom was one of those things. Then Danny gave the order that sealed his fate. He commanded every human ship in the system to attack. 500 vessels against 3,000. Suicide by any rational calculation. But humans had never been entirely rational when their freedom was threatened. The human fleet charged forward. Council captains watched in disbelief as the primitive ships accelerated toward them. War Chief Throck realized these humans actually intended to fight. They were not posturing or bluffing. They truly meant to attack his armada with their handful of ships. The battle began. Council weapons tore through human shields like paper. Human vessels exploded by the dozens. Bright flowers of flame in the darkness. But the humans kept coming. Damaged ships continued firing until their reactors went critical. Crippled vessels rammed Council warships, sacrificing themselves to take enemies with them. Danny's station took heavy fire. Shields collapsed within minutes. Armor melted under concentrated energy beams. He ordered non-essential personnel to the escape pods, but most refused to go. They stayed at their posts fighting until the end. A human destroyer, the Valiant, lost all weapons and main power. Her captain, Commander Sarah Lou, pointed her dying ship at a Council heavy cruiser and engaged emergency thrusters. The destroyer crashed into the cruiser at full speed. Both ships exploded, taking 1,000 lives with them. Captain Sophie Blake fought aboard the Defiant, coordinating hit-and-run attacks against the Council flanks. Her ship was faster than most Council vessels, able to strike and retreat before taking heavy damage. But even speed could not save them forever. A Council battleship caught the Defiant with a direct hit. Sophie's ship spun out of control, life support failing. Sophie ordered evacuation but stayed at the helm, trying to give her crew time to escape. She managed to get the Defiant's engines working again and aimed her ship at another Council vessel. Before she could ram them, her executive officer knocked her unconscious and carried her to an escape pod. The Defiant crashed into the Council ship without her. War Chief Throck watched the battle from his command deck, increasingly horrified. The humans were losing badly. They had lost 300 ships already with only minimal damage to the Council fleet. But they were not retreating. Every human vessel fought until it was destroyed or crippled beyond function. A human frigate, engines failing and weapons offline, ejected its reactor core directly at a Council destroyer. The core went critical seconds later, obliterating both ships. Throck realized that humans had no concept of acceptable losses. They would sacrifice everything, every last ship and soldier, rather than surrender. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, 480 human ships were destroyed. Only 20 vessels remained functional, most of them badly damaged. But the Council had paid a terrible price. 800 warships were lost. The mighty Grand Armada, assembled to crush humanity with overwhelming force, had been mauled by an enemy that should have been helpless. Danny Wright died when Sentinel's wall exploded, its reactor breached by Council weapons. He never knew that his sacrifice helped destroy 12 Council ships. He never knew that his final stand would become legend among both humans and aliens. Captain Sophie Blake woke up in an escape pod 3 days later. She was rescued by a human patrol ship and learned what had happened. The solar system's outer defenses had been destroyed. Earth now stood exposed, but the Council fleet had been so badly damaged that they withdrew to repair and regroup. The Council had won the battle, but they had not won the war. Because humanity still refused to surrender, Earth's remaining fleets prepared for the next assault. Colony worlds armed themselves. Every human who could hold a weapon trained for combat. President Karen Hughes broadcast a message throughout the galaxy. She stood in the ruins of the Earth Defense Fleet headquarters, damaged by a Council missile that had gotten through the defenses. Her face was tired but defiant. She spoke to the Council, to the 47 species watching from the safety of their distant worlds. She told them that humanity had fought for every inch of progress in its history. Humans had endured ice ages, plagues, world wars, and near extinction. They had faced impossible odds before and survived through sheer determination. Karen said that if the Council wanted to destroy humanity, they would have to exterminate every last human, and humanity would make them pay for every world, every city, every life. The cost would be so high that the Council would remember humanity for the rest of their existence. The message ended. Sophie watched it from her hospital bed, her body covered in burns from the battle. She thought about Danny Wright, about Sarah Liu, about all the others who had died. They had given humanity time. Time to prepare, time to build more ships, time to teach the galaxy that humans would never stop fighting. War Chief Throck received the message aboard his damaged flagship. He understood now what they faced. Humans could not be defeated through conventional warfare. Even total victory would cost thousands of ships. And after Earth fell, the colonies would continue fighting. After the colonies fell, individual humans would wage guerrilla warfare for generations. There was no acceptable victory condition when fighting an enemy that refused to accept defeat. The Council had created a problem that could not be solved through force, and that realization terrified every species in the galaxy. The galaxy held its breath. 3 weeks had passed since the Battle of Sol, and humanity still had not surrendered. The Council's Grand Armada sat in damaged formation at a staging area, undergoing repairs. 800 ships lost, thousands of warriors dead. The cost of a single battle against primitives who should have been easy to defeat. War Chief Throck walked through the medical bay of his flagship, visiting wounded soldiers. He saw warriors from a dozen different species, all injured fighting humans. A young Kithran pilot who had lost 3 limbs when her fighter was destroyed. A Mandible Clan warrior whose armor had been fused to his body by human weapons. They looked at him with questions in their eyes. Why were they fighting this war? What had humanity done to deserve such violence? Throck had no good answers. The humans had refused to obey. That was their only crime. They had said no to demands that every other species in the galaxy had accepted, and for that crime, the Council was prepared to exterminate them. When Throck thought about it honestly, he felt shame for the first time in his long military career. On Earth, President Karen Hughes met with her remaining military commanders. Admiral Frank Cooper reported that they had perhaps 2 months before the Council attacked again. Maybe 3 if they were lucky. Earth's shipyards were working around the clock to build new vessels, but they could not replace losses fast enough. The next battle would likely be the last. Karen asked Frank if there was any possibility of victory. The old admiral shook his head. Not in conventional terms. They might destroy more Council ships, might make the enemy pay dearly, but Earth's defenses would eventually fall. After that, it was only a matter of time before humanity was conquered or exterminated. But Frank said something else, something that gave Karen a flicker of hope. He said the Council was afraid. They had spent 3,000 years as unchallenged rulers of the galaxy. Now they faced an enemy that refused to be intimidated. The Council did not know how to handle that. Fear was a weapon, and humanity had learned how to use it. Captain Sophie Blake returned to duty despite her injuries. She was given command of a new ship, the Dauntless, cobbled together from salvaged parts and new construction. The ship was not pretty, but she was functional. Sophie's crew was a mix of veterans from the Battle of Saul and fresh recruits who had never seen combat. Sophie gathered her crew and spoke honestly. She told them they would probably die in the next battle. The Council would come back with overwhelming force, determined to crush Earth completely. But their deaths would matter. Every Council ship they destroyed was one less ship threatening human colonies. Every minute they held the line was more time for civilians to evacuate. Her crew did not flinch. They knew what they had signed up for. One young ensign, barely 19 years old, said something that stuck with Sophie. He said his grandmother had fled a dictatorship on Earth 70 years ago. She always told him that freedom was precious because it cost so much. Now he understood what she meant. In the Council chambers on Axiom Prime, an emergency session was underway. Counselor Zix presented his updated analysis of the situation. The numbers were stark. At the current rate of attrition, defeating humanity would cost at least 4,000 more ships, perhaps twice that number if humans continued to fight with their characteristic ferocity. Even after conquering Earth, the Council would face decades of guerrilla warfare across human colonies. Insurgents, terrorists, resistance movements that would never stop fighting. The Council would spend centuries trying to suppress humans, bleeding resources and warriors the entire time. And throughout the galaxy, other species would watch and wonder if they too could resist. Zix said that destroying humanity was possible, but would cost everything the Council had built. The peace they had maintained for 3,000 years would collapse. Species would rebel. The galactic order would fracture. All because humans refused to accept slavery. One of the elders spoke, her ancient voice filled with weariness. She asked a simple question. Why had the Council demanded submission instead of offering partnership? What had they been afraid of? The chamber fell silent. No one had a good answer. The Council had operated through intimidation for so long that they had forgotten why they started. The original purpose had been to prevent war, to create stability. But somewhere along the way, they had become exactly what they claimed to oppose. They had become tyrants, demanding obedience and crushing dissent. Ambassador Velnara stood and spoke. She said that humans had taught the Council a valuable lesson, though it had cost thousands of lives. True peace could not be maintained through force alone. It required respect, partnership, and mutual benefit. The Council had none of those things with humanity. They had only demands and threats. Velnara proposed something radical. Instead of trying to destroy humanity, the Council should recognize them as equals, offer them genuine diplomatic relations based on respect and mutual interest. Trade, cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, not as masters and servants, but as partners. War Chief Throck surprised everyone by supporting the proposal. He said that defeating humanity in battle was possible but not worth the cost. The warriors under his command were asking questions. Why were they fighting? What purpose did this war serve? Throck could not give them satisfying answers because there were no satisfying answers. The debate continued for days. Some council members still demanded humanity's complete subjugation, but more and more voices joined Velnara and Throck. The tide was turning. The council was beginning to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. President Karen Hughes received an unexpected message. Ambassador Velnara requested permission to visit Earth, alone and unarmed. She wanted to discuss terms for peace. Karen consulted with her advisors. Many warned it could be a trick, but Karen decided to take the risk. If there was any chance of ending this war without more bloodshed, she had to try. Velnara arrived at the White House 3 days later. She looked different than she had during first contact. Less proud, more uncertain. She met with Karen in the Oval Office, just the two of them and a translator. Velnara began by apologizing. She said the council had approached humanity with arrogance and contempt. They had assumed humans would be like every other species, eager to trade freedom for security. They had been wrong, and that mistake had cost thousands of lives on both sides. Karen listened without interrupting. When Velnara finished, she asked one simple question. Why should humanity trust the council now? What had changed except the council's realization that humans would not be easy to conquer? Velnara did not have a perfect answer. She admitted that the council was afraid. Afraid of humanity's determination. Afraid of what would happen if other species followed humanity's example. But she said that fear could be the foundation for respect. The council now understood that humans were not primitives to be dismissed. They were a force to be reckoned with. She presented a treaty. Full recognition of human sovereignty. Equal membership in the Galactic Council with voting rights. Open trade and cultural exchange. No tribute, no demands, no restrictions on human colonization. The council would treat humanity as partners, not subjects. Karen read through the treaty carefully. It was everything humanity had wanted from the beginning. She asked what humanity had to offer in return. Velnara said the council hoped humans would share their unique perspective. 3,000 years of peace through intimidation had created stagnation. The galaxy needed change, new ideas, fresh thinking. Humanity could provide that. The treaty was signed 3 weeks later. Captain Sophie Blake attended the ceremony aboard a neutral space station. She stood in dress uniform, her burns still visible on her hands and neck. Around her were other survivors from the Battle of Sol, representing the thousands who had died for this moment. Commander Pete Harris, who had survived the destruction of Proxima Station by pure luck, stood beside Sophie. He whispered that Captain Lisa Grant would have been proud. Sophie agreed. Lisa had sacrificed herself to prove that humans could hurt the council. That sacrifice had changed everything. War Chief Throck attended as well, representing the council's military. He approached Sophie after the ceremony. Through a translator, he said that humans were the most dangerous species he had ever fought, not because of their weapons or technology, but because of their absolute refusal to surrender. He said that was a quality worth respecting. Sophie thanked him for his honesty. She said that humans did not enjoy war. They fought when necessary, but they preferred peace. The difference was that humans would never accept peace at the cost of their freedom. Throck said he understood that now. The galaxy would be better for learning that lesson. 6 months after the treaty signing, the first permanent Earth embassy opened on Axiom Prime. Commander Sophie Blake was appointed as military liaison, working with Council Defense Forces to coordinate security operations. She walked through the halls of the embassy, looking at images on the walls, pictures of Earth, of human ships, of the defenders who had died. One image showed Captain Danny Wright standing on the bridge of Sentinel's Wall. Another showed Captain Lisa Grant at Proxima Station. There were hundreds more, each representing someone who had given their life for human freedom. Sophie made sure every visitor to the embassy saw these images.